Hi, let's talk a little bit about grid size on the different AAC apps. So grid size means how many buttons there are per page when you're looking at the app. I'm going to start with Touch Chat. So TouchChat provides a lot of options for changing the grid size. The one that we're looking at right now is 60 buttons. And this, I would say, is kind of our primary recommendation for TouchChat. I noticed that I can't change between page sets, between vocabulary sets. So I'm also going to, as we talk about grid size, I'm going to change that in my settings really fast. But when we think about grid size, what we want to be able to, when we're picking the grid size for the AAC user, we want to pick the grid size that is the largest that the person can reasonably access with their access system. So either like touching or using a switch system, or for people who use an eye gaze system that way, and that they can see to be able to access visually. But for most AAC users, we don't really have to think about like the visual clutter on the page. I like to think about this like when I use my cell phone, the apps on I have a lot of apps on my phone, like overflowing pages and pages of apps. And the apps on my phone that I don't use do not prevent me from using the apps that I do use. And we want to think about that when it comes to the grid size and the buttons that the AAC user has access to. So when we're thinking about the grid size, we want to be thinking about what does the AAC user need now for communication, but also what do they need medium to long term? What might their communication look like in 3 years or 5 years? And how can we pick a setup, a layout that will support them into their future growth? So we don't necessarily want to limit what they might be able to do in the future by choosing a really, really kind of stripped down and minimal option grid size right now when they're first getting exposed to AAC. So we're thinking about this one's a 60 grid, like I said. This is nice because it provides some decent access to these core words on the first page. Core words are the words that we use 70 to 80% of the time when we make sentences. And it also provides easy access to fringe words. Fringe words are highly specific words that make up the other 20 to 30% of the vocabulary words that we use. And to make complex sentences, to talk about complex topics, the AAC user needs access to both core words and fringe words. And all of the apps that we're talking about offer access to both core and fringe words. That is called robust communication access. So this is the 60 button grid set. The buttons are still a decent size. If I touch the button, my finger fits nicely in that square. And so usually this is fairly easy for people to access, but I'll show you some other grid size options in TouchChat. I'm going to go down here to TouchChat with word power. If we wanted to go to a larger grid size than the 60 we were just looking at, we could look at, for example, word power with a keyboard on the main page. That's what this looks like. So you can see, again, it gives access to a lot of the core vocabulary that we might use to make sentences.
Don't go for the ride. Don't tell him.
So we can make some pretty quick sentences by combining a lot of the words on the home page. It also gives access to some nice fringe vocabulary words within the groups, within people, places, time, some phrases within social, and you have the added benefit of a keyboard right here on the front page. So for AAC users who are either literate or pre-literate, this can give access to typing right there on your homepage. I'm going to go back to vocab and click choose new vocab. And then I'm going to again scroll down to look at our word power page sets. And I'll also show you 108. And you'll see that these buttons in the 108 grid size get much smaller. But for people who have fine motor skills as a strength, this might be a great option because the larger the grid size, the fewer buttons we have to press to say our message. So now we have many more core words on the home page, and we still have a keyboard. Let's look at what the home page might look like if we went smaller. I'm scrolling again back down to word power, and let's look at 42. I'm going to go to 42 Basic SS. This one has a little more visual support with some of the basic words. And again, you can see we still have some core words on the homepage, but it's much less than the 60, for example, 18 fewer buttons per page. And so if I wanted to say,
don't go for the ride,
it's still predicting what I might want to say.
Don't.
But now I want to say tell, and it's not here. So I have to go to actions and find that over here.
Yeah.
So I had to do more button presses to say my same message than I did on a vocabulary set that has more buttons per page. This is typically the smallest grid size that we recommend because
I don't go for a ride, don't tell him.
Excuse me. If we go much smaller than this, it's really difficult to say anything. And at that point, we're really limiting the AAC users' communication options. So for example, this is the 25 word power. So 5 by 5, 25 buttons on the screen. And I can't make this sentence anymore.
No.
Oh,
Go.
maybe I can. Nope. So now I'm stuck. Can I find the word for?
For. Hey.
And where you could see before, it was like predicting that might be something I want to say. Now my words are really limited. What if I want to say, don't tell him?
No.
So right now, as someone who's very familiar with this app, I'm having a difficult time finding the words that I want to say. And I'm having to press a lot of buttons. Yeah, and I can't find the word tell. I would have to be literate and be able to find it in A to Z. So the smaller you go, as far as fewer options, a smaller grid size, you can see it's really limiting what you're able to say. Let's look at a different app and see what that might look like. Here's TD Snap. This is the motor plan layout on TD Snap. Actually, this is a hybrid version. I'm going to change over to the motor plan layout because that is one of the vocab sets that comes as a template in TD Snap. So this is motor plan 66. It's interesting, within TD Snap, typically you don't include the gray buttons when you're counting the grid size. So if this were counting the grid size with kind of like the old TD Snap rules, it would be 60. But because it's added like 11 rows down here to include where and why, they're calling it 66. But this is motor plan 66. There's also a motor plan 40 and motor plan 30 that we could change to. And you would see again that that would really give you way less access to a lot of the core words that you might want to say. I'm going to go to motor plan 30. Motor plan 30. And it's going to load it up. And then we'll be able to see the difference. Oh, except it quit on me. Hopefully it'll load and we should be able to see the difference between, this is 66 again. That's all right. Instead, let's switch over to core first and see what that looks like. And core first, this I believe is 7 by 7. And within core first, it's pretty easy to change the grid size, but we recommend picking a grid size and sticking with it because as the AAC user is learning to use the device, we don't ever want the buttons to move. So like I said, we're selecting a vocab set that will support them now and also into the future. And we, again, want to be thinking medium to long term, like 3 to 5 years. And if you think about, for example, your keyboard on your cell phone, imagine that when you first learned to type on a cell phone, I gave you like a really simplified stripped down keyboard that only allowed you to say a couple of words. And then once you got really good and fast at it, I changed it on you. And all of a sudden I was like, you have way more words, but you have to start from scratch with your learning. And that's what we're doing to an AAC user if we change their grid set. So much, much better to start with a larger grid set and teach them to use it than to start with something smaller and increase it once they develop mastery. And you can really see, I wouldn't ever recommend going smaller than 5x5 on TD Snap. Again, you can see that because you have fewer options, it's much more limiting. So this is the 5x5, and we're just counting the colored squares in the middle, not the outside border, which is related to kind of system management and navigation to quick fires and topics. I'm gonna go a little bit bigger. We were at the 7x7 before. Even 6x6 gives a lot more options. And now you have the WH questions on the front page, which is gonna support the ability to communicate for lots of different reasons. Let's take a look at LAMP Words for Life, because this is one of the apps where you have no option to decrease the grid size. And I actually love that about LAMP. LAMP stands for Language Acquisition for Motor Planning, LAMP. And the idea is that the AAC user relies heavily on their motor planning, which is the way we move our body to execute or to make different movements happen. And the idea is that within LAMP, every single movement is the same. So if I want to say do, I always do this.
Do.
Every single time.
Do.
It's those two touches. If you're in an app that doesn't support motor planning, there might be 30 ways to say the word do. And while that might be helpful for some AAC users, that might be confusing for others. So LAMP always has 84 buttons. And you can hide some of the buttons. They have other kind of vocabulary sets where you can do 2 hits to say a button or 1 hit. But really, I think to build that complete motor plan of the entire movement to say the word, LAMP Words for Life Full is a great way to go. Okay, lastly, let's talk about Proloquo to Go. And Proloquo to Go, similar to TD Snap Core First, it's fairly easy to change the grid size. Oops, I'm going to actually do it in settings. And here I have the quick menu. I can change the grid size, and it gives you a lot of options. Right now, we're on 7x11, 77 buttons, which gives a lot of access to core words, fringe words, different folders, the ability to communicate for lots of different reasons. If I wanted to change to, let's say 20 buttons, 5x4, oops, you can see already that my communication options are way decreased. I can only make simple sentences. And so while there are fewer visual options and it's maybe visually less overwhelming, also cognitively, it's more frustrating because I have to search much more for what I want to say. I have to press way more buttons to get to my end message. And so even though theoretically this might seem like it would be easier, it oftentimes is not. Let's go back to a larger page set. Even 60 buttons, I feel like for a lot of AAC users is a really good option. The buttons are still a really decent size, easy for my finger to press. If the AAC user needed a key guard, so a piece of plastic with holes cut out where the buttons are, it would fit nicely over this page set. And it's easy to make lots of sentences with the large amount of core words and fringe words available. So that's a little bit about grid size, and I hope you found this helpful.